I'm really thrilled to have you here this evening as part of our Big Bang celebration, where we get to showcase the wonders of science, science communication, and this evening a special focus on sustainability. How can we live in this world and enjoy what we do in our civilization while leaving a good and even better world for future generations? So we have two of these wonderful sessions going on simultaneously, one here and another in the planetarium tonight. And so tonight we have a wonderful discussion called Words into Action, How We Inspire Sustainability. It's a conversation really about how do we take what we know and bring it to heart, from words to action, not just ideas, but meaning. And so we're going to have two wonderful guests here this evening who will be in a conversation together talking about this intersection of sustainability, of science, of media, and storytelling. And I just could not be more happy with the two folks who've agreed to be here this evening, two world leaders in this space, and we're just so lucky to have them. First is Wendy Schmidt. Wendy was a former trustee here at the Cal Academy and actually helped us start this Big Bang Gala. So we're very deeply grateful for Wendy's work at the Academy over the years. Today, she's the president of the Schmidt Family Foundation, where it works on issues like renewable energy and climate change and sustainability issues all around the world. In 2009, with her husband Eric, they founded the Schmidt Ocean Institute as well, which is helping to explore the world's oceans and bring the science of marine biology and oceanography to everyone. And it was quite fantastic. In 2012, they actually funded a private research vessel called the Falcor, which is used by scientists around the world to make mind-blowing discoveries. And I think we'll see some of them maybe tonight, which is very exciting. She's also the principal behind Climate Central, a place that tries to bring climate science into the news in a nonpartisan, scientifically accurate way, which is just fantastic. So why don't we welcome Wendy Schmidt to the stage, please. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you.
Turn myself on?
Yeah. And joining Wendy tonight is a dear friend of mine, Andrew Revkin. Many of you who are in science and science journalism know his name. He's considered really one of the best science reporters ever, really. He's worked on so many different issues, from deforestation to climate change, and the broader issues about how do we sustain a world with maybe 9 billion people on it. He's been a longtime writer and journalist associated with the New York Times. He runs the very, very popular and influential .Earth blog at the New York Times. If you don't follow that, you should. It's really one of the best places on the web today, really at the intersection of science and policy on these crucial issues. Andy is a world-renowned speaker and journalist on these crucial issues, but more importantly, he's one of the few people I know who's very deeply respected by the world's scientific community and the world journalism community. That's a really hard thing to pull off. So we're delighted to have Andy here, kind of help contribute to tonight's conversation. So Andy, would you join us on the stage, please? Thank you.
Great, thank you.
And before I get off the stage here, too, I wanted to take a moment to just tell you a little bit about how important this issue is to the Academy as well. Doing science is great, but it isn't going to do any good if it's just locked up in an ivory tower somewhere. We have to share it with the world. So one of the things we're truly excited about here is our first kind of way of taking that out into a much broader audience than even this building is this new exercise we have tonight. Maybe on the screen we can show it. We've just launched a beautiful new web magazine called BioGraphic. It's at biographic.com. Maybe you could check it out later. Put away your phones. Don't do it now. But it's awesome. You should check it out later. BioGraphic is a really fantastic place. I'm deeply proud of what we're doing there. We're going to be telling immersive, beautiful stories about the wonders of the natural world and the heroes who fight to sustain it. And instead of just all the bad news about everything's going wrong on this planet, we're going to look for those signs of hope where we can find solutions and find inspiration to change the world for the better. So if you have a chance later, you can see this wonderful site. Just a little plug for that, but I think it was apropos given what we were talking about this evening. Finally, I would like to thank Carmel Partners and Pacific Gas and Electric for sponsoring this part of the event tonight. Let's give them a round of applause for that. That was fantastic. We depend on these partners and sponsors to provide this to the larger public, and this is something that we really deeply care about, so thank you so much for that. This will last for about 30 or 40 minutes or so, and then after that we'll be going into the dinner, and we'll have staff escorting you there, so just stay put, enjoy, and we'll see you later this evening. Thank you very much.
So assuming, yeah, there it is. I'm amplified. It's great. It's really great to be here. I was here a few months ago with my wife. I was at the AGU meeting, the giant science meeting that happens here every December, and couldn't resist coming here and checking out the tide pool tank. And there's so many things that are exciting that are going on in this place. John Foley, I latched onto him years ago as a source for me when I'm writing about the future of agriculture and the interface of agriculture and ecology. And part of me is bummed that he left academia but it's actually incredibly exciting that he's come to a venue like this and is working so hard, as he was at University of Minnesota, with outreach and making sure that science interfaces with society. Remember, the gatekeepers, a lot of us, a decent number of the people in this room grew up with Walter Cronkite. That model of journalism was like, that's the way it is, right? And he was the gatekeeper. The New York Times was the gatekeeper. You had to come to those places to find out what was actually going on in the world. And now, an institution creating knowledge has the obligation and opportunity to do that directly. And doing it creatively, search engine optimization, things they know pretty well at Google too. It's a level playing field. That's what's so cool. It's interesting to me, I hadn't absorbed until I was getting ready for this that you had started out heading toward journalism yourself. And I don't know if you wanted to talk about what part of that lingers in you now, even though you've moved on to so many other things.
Well, I think it's wonderful training for anybody to learn how to write well and to learn how to tell a story. And if we have a challenge now...
And to learn how to know what's real.
Well, in this space, it's how do you engage people where they live? John, you mentioned Climate Central. When we started this evening, here you have an organization that we founded in 2008 that combines scientists who want to tell the story of climate change without an agenda, without being advocates for any particular policy, and journalists who are trained to tell stories and try to communicate to people where they live. What is going to happen to you? It's really interesting to hear about polar bears and things melting in faraway places, but what is going to happen to you? And so they've developed these very interesting interactive tools that can tell the story through the weathermen, because a lot of Americans watch television to find out the weather. So let's put a climate minute. Let's offer the package that people won't pay to produce and put it in their newscast. Or let's create an interactive sea level rise tool where you can type in your zip code and see under different scenarios of warming what might happen where you live. This is a very different way of talking to people than top down. It's very interactive.
Is there an Ocean Central? You know what I mean? Is there a way to build that model out even more?
An Ocean Central
for ocean science and change.
Well, we could look at corals, for instance, and what the Academy is going to do right now, which I think is phenomenal, to go out to these distant and unknown coral areas, especially the ones beneath 100 feet, below where recreational divers ever see, and go and explore these things, record information, create an online kind of database where researchers and people concerned with conservation can go in a coordinated way. And also, of course, the issue about repairing them with a new and interesting technology to go to damaged coral reefs and repair them. So I think this frontier is endless.
And it's, I've been writing about this, being a blogger now I started .earth in 2007 when I was still a news reporter. And I've been trying to understand the online environment and trying to figure out what you can actually change with that or not. How much of it is just eye candy and how much of it kind of pulls someone in enough to actually change a habit or get engaged or contribute to something or think about how it relates to their lives. And it's really an interesting, I think it's still an open question. When Google, Sylvia Earle, a number of years ago, when she prodded Google to create Google Ocean, to fill in that.
I was here when that was launched. And she's here tonight, but
Oh, Sylvia.
I was.
Stand up, please. Actually, it says a lot about where we are, that, as I understood it at the time and reported, that Google, it's an incredible tool, Google Earth, but it was created from zero up, right? They had to rejigger the whole package to put in stuff that was below sea level.
But you know Sylvia's question. It was very famous.
Yeah, yeah.
It steered the whole thing. She was seeing a demonstration of Google Earth at the campus, and she looked at it and that's great, but why don't you just call it Google Dirt? That's not the Earth.
Yeah.
71% of the Earth is ocean.
I know.
And I will never forget, I mean, an inspiration for a lot of the work that we've done at Schmidt Ocean Institute came from a video that they showed here at the Academy. We had Jimmy Buffett, we had Sylvia Earle on stage, all these people in cute blue t-shirts. And there was a video, I've tried to find it ever since because I will never forget it. It was animated, and it was a bird's eye view of a bird flying over mountains and valleys and on over land, and then that camera that would have been on the bird went through the surface of the ocean, and it just kept going.
That's so great.
And it was the first time for me, and I must be for everybody, where that land just continued, and it's the same thing. It's the same thing, and I thought that's the key insight here. This is all one land mass. This isn't under the sea or on the land, and everything you do on the land is affecting that. And everything that happens there is affecting everything on land.
Right.
Key insight. So it was a very important launch.
Yeah. But what I like about this place, and other places like it, is if you're an urban kid, you can still come here and get wet. The tanks, I put it on Facebook after I visited here a few months ago. And what I wrote at the time when Google Oceans came out is, it's great, but do you need to still get wet just to really care, to really engage with the oceans? And that's, to me, still an open question. I think that there's a lot of potential in visualization and that stuff, but we still have to find ways to get kids dirty and wet.
And on boats.
And on boats,
and
yeah.
out there. Yeah. I mean, the power of these systems is unrealized until somebody's actually out on a boat in choppy water or a storm is coming. And suddenly you can relate historically to every other human being that's ever been on a boat, right?
So with Schmidt Foundation, what aspects of this challenge are you looking at right now?
In the Schmidt Family Foundation?
Yeah.
Well, we started out in 2006 because I got inspired by that slideshow that Al Gore did in 2005. We invited him to Stanford to do it. They were filming the movie at that time, so they had the camera crew. But he was literally on stage with his, pointer and doing these slides. And it's hard for us to remember, but in 2005, climate change was not a topic. And I thought, this is incredible. I live in Silicon Valley, where we have changed the way we do absolutely everything in the last 30 years, and nobody has even heard of this. What are we going to do? What's our response? So we started the Family Foundation, and we launched the 11th Hour Project as an idea of saying, it's the 11th hour. Okay, folks, let's get on board here. What are we going to do? And we worked on climate and clean energy and stuff like that for like 2 years, trying to educate people and bring people together around these ideas. And within 2 years, we realized you're not going to solve this problem unless you look at agriculture, unless you look at our food system. It's integral to emissions. It's integral to the solution. I've learned even more about that in the last few years, about sequestration and soil. And then again, within 2 years of that time, you can't solve that problem unless you actually look at human rights. And how do those three things intersect? Because I think they do intersect. And they intersect in a historic way that they're all legacies of something else. And we are bearing the burden, our children are bearing the burden, and it's time to reimagine our future. So that's what we focus on mostly now, is what does the next revolution look like? I think we're actually in it. I was going to tell you, I get my climate news and my environmental news from reading the business section. Mm-hmm. I look at it every day, and I find these stories that give me hope to say this is a huge shift going on right now. And the CEO at Cargill says on the front page of the business section of the Wall Street Journal 2 weeks ago that we've got to do things differently. Largest consolidated privately held commodities food producer says people want to know where their food comes from, who produces it, is the company ethical, how do we treat our animals? I thought, okay, yep. Johnson & Johnson wants to reformulate its baby products. Remember, what was it called, No More Tears? Well, they want to take the toxic stuff out because the customers now don't like that so much, right?
Yeah.
I mean, 400,000 Teslas were ordered in the last month, right? you hear trouble with Solar City, and yet Solar Mosaic has just raised $200 million.
That's good to know. I wrote about them a few years ago, and they were struggling. So that's good news. Does everyone know about Solar Mosaic? Could you explain a little bit about what it is?
Oh, well, they are selling loans to people buying houses to install solar, so that you can do that from the beginning and get the benefit of having a solar installation in your home. So it's like a solar mortgage.
And one thing, Solar Mosaic, one of the founders is this young guy, Billy Parrish, who demonstrates to me a really important trait in the 21st century. In 2005, I met him at the Montreal Climate Talks. He was a kid, and he had bare feet, and he was
like a college activist.
Energy Action. He was a founder of Energy Action Coalition, and he was great. He was great at doing that, getting in the hallways and saying, you know, it's our climate. All you gray-suited older people are messing with. But there was a point when he realized that that was just one facet what had to be done, and he shifted into being an entrepreneur. And to me, it's this sort of, we think about resilience in terms of like a flood-proof building or something, but resilience is also that adaptability, especially in young people, that you have your goal, and if something isn't kind of getting you there, having that ability to shift and move in another direction, I think,
and
is
have
key.
an economic base for the change. That's the other thing. If it doesn't work as a business, it's not really going to work. So there are a lot of nice things we like about changing the way we do things, and cradle to cradle, and all these wonderful ideas that we're all working on, but they have to have an economic base. You know, you've got to have a buy-in. I'll give you a good example. At the Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute here in San Francisco, I sit on the board of this organization, and there's an initiative called Fashion Positive. Okay, we want to change the way the fashion industry works. What are their problems? Well, they're very polluting, right? 80% of everything manufactured goes to landfill. These are big structural problems, but how do you get to the people in the industry and change them? Right. You have to help them. You have to give them the kind of loan they need to certify their products, because they're not going to take that off the bottom line. You have to give them a library of safe chemicals and safe processes that people have figured out, so they don't have to do that R&D, because they're not going to do it. And when you give them a set of tools like that, you start to get people signing up. And you start to be able to say, we could shift this. We could create a less polluting industry. Or we could even produce one that doesn't even have that much waste involved with it, because of all the wonderful 3D printing that we have now.
And some of that comes from nudging from the outside. I also teach, for 6 years now, I've been teaching at Pace University as well. That's my main job now. The Times is my second job, and I've got a third and fourth jobs, like many people today. But I teach a course called, well, it was called Blogging a Better Planet. And one of my students, she's a Jamaican-American heritage, and she remembered, the students all have to create blogs about something that makes the world better. I don't care whether it's sports or whatever. It's not just environment. And she created her blog about this issue, about fashion. It was about the issues, the stories behind the fabric. Because her mother worked at a sweatshop in Jamaica. And her first post was about her mother doing these long walks to get to work and coming back. And so you think about in every arena now, including Volkswagen, think about what happened. How many of you have one of those Volkswagens? Did you get your checks yet? The $500 or whatever? So, but how did many of you, I'm sure, know the story of how that was unraveled. You know, they got away with it for, what, 6, 7 years. But all it took was a nonprofit group hiring 2 or 3 scientists to actually drive the car, measure the emissions, and and they realized the computer was saying something fundamentally different. And that unraveled this whole thing. You think about Greenpeace, which I've criticized before for some things they do, on issues like palm oil plantations and pulp and paper. You know, they have people in the field with their Indonesian partners showing what's happening on the ground. They put that on YouTube. And then they had these great marketing videos that were targeted at young people around Kit Kat bars. This was a few years ago, which were made in Europe by Nestle. And they had these pretty edgy videos on YouTube directed at teenagers in Europe, where you bite into the Kit Kat bar and it's like an orangutan finger. You know, I'm talking harsh, but you haven't eaten yet. So. But they were very effective. So having the ground truthing and the creative communication skills, and the company is in the middle going, help, help! And so it goes to one of the bigger, more mainstream environmental groups. And all of this, to me, gives me a lot of hope that we're in a world where the Panama Papers are kind of the ultimate example of transparency is increasingly going to be imposable. So if you're a big company and you're not proactive and you're not thinking about the customer's potential to know the story behind the hemline, then you'll probably regret it. And I think that's a big driver of this.
That's a big shift. I'm very hopeful for the same reasons. You know, in the last 35 years since Eric and I were in graduate school at Berkeley, and computers were the size of this room, right? They're now in the palm of your hand, and you have more power in your phone than sent men to the moon, right? And people have grown up. My children certainly grew up in an age of querying. You get to ask, right? You spend all day long asking questions and getting answers. And everybody is accountable. I like to think that we are in a trend that where that transparency that you mentioned leads to accountability. It has to.
Yeah.
Right?
I think
That's good for everybody.
Yeah, in the end, there'll be issues. You know, the whole privacy thing is the privacy, transparency. It gets interesting, but which is what life is interesting. You know, it's all going to be a mix. There's no easy answers. Climate change is the ultimate example of some place where there's no easy answer. And I've written about this now. This is my 31st year writing about the human relationship to the climate system. So
Changing faster than you thought.
No, actually.
Right on schedule?
No, I look back at the book I wrote in 1992. Pretty much it's played out. It's not
played out, and Al Gore was right.
Yeah, Al Gore
That's
actually.
the funniest thing.
Senator Al Gore did the blurb for my book.
Yeah.
Senator Al Gore. That's
Yeah.
how long ago this is. And I mean, the basic parameters of the story have been about the same. And the complexity, though, is that a big chunk of the world hasn't developed the capacity to have air conditioning and to have mobility that brought me here. And that's a real part of the issue. I think the world is, Paris actually reflected the complexity of what we face. It was the first treaty negotiation in the 20-plus year process where the outcome was a journey instead of the hoped for like a contract. And that, I think, is actually a hopeful thing.
And it's got to build. And when you look at poorer countries with economies that cannot be lifted out of poverty, with the service industries and things that we have that actually can generate an economy, you look at them and you say, well, the plus side of that is they don't have an aging infrastructure to replace either, in many cases. We do some work in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And there are some very large dam projects there that have been funded by the World Bank and other big funders. And they tend to displace people. They tend to displace, obviously, they run the river off, right? But they're really vulnerable. Not only do they not power the people who live near them, they tend to power the miners in South Africa and other special interests, and the larger in Africa, the more corrupt, probably by definition. There are other newer technologies that can be deployed that are micro dams that actually divert far less of the river. They don't displace people. They do power up local villages and communities. And groups like ours can get involved in those things and help further them. We had a group there about a month ago, and someone came back and he said, I just saw the first frivolous use of electricity in Africa that I've ever seen. And you know what it was? He said, I saw the power poles that came from the micro dam, and they strung power along, and we got to the center of the village, and there were Christmas lights strung up.
Interesting.
As well as street lights, as well as reading lights for people.
Right.
The other vulnerability of the large project is that in climate change scenarios, where you have very heavy rains, you could overpower the dam and its ability to operate, or you have drought, which lowers the river level to the point where the dam is ineffective.
Right.
So you don't win in either way. So we've got to really think more clearly about what is the problem, what is the opportunity to both address climate change, to address a lot of these other issues of equality and access. We had a discussion at the foundation last week that is access to power a human right. It wouldn't used to be probably, but now it probably is, because you can't do anything without it.
Yeah.
Really, that matters, right? You can't even lower emissions without access to power.
No, and one of the things that was really cool in the Gates letter this year, the Bill and Melinda Gates letter, was her part of it. Her half of the letter was about time, that essentially if you don't have energy, you have to spend, and it's mostly women and girls, you have to go out to gather the firewood and tend the fire, and time is taken from you, which is essentially a form of slavery, or it's a terrible cost. And that, when you see that, I'm sure you've been places where you see that, you realize that it is, whether or not it's a right, I think it's an imperative of the wealthier parts of the world to help facilitate that build out in poor places. Just in 2010, it was the year Ban Ki-moon gave his wonderful Sustainable Energy for All speech when that program started. And the anecdote he built that speech around was just unbelievable. Here he is, Secretary General of the UN, and he was recalling in post-war Korea, when he was a kid doing his homework every night, he did it by kerosene light, and they got candles for finals. When he was studying for finals, he could use a candle because it was a few more lumens. Yeah. And that same, when I was writing this piece about that, and Liz Hadley, who's right here from the Bay Area, she has a book coming out with her husband, Tony, on sustainability. And this anecdote is in the book. She had just come back from Nepal, and she told me she was there doing a climate change study, impacts on small mammals. And she was in a national park in Nepal, and she just, in an email, I think it was an email, not a phone conversation, she said, the people running 2 tea houses on this trail, it was the end of the day, they were getting ready to cook dinner. One of the boys had come out of the woods with, come out of the forest with a bundle of firewood. And there's so little firewood there that you have to climb the trees to break off the branches. So here's this pile of wood, and then he went in, and a kid from the other house started raiding the pile, and these 2 families ended up in a knife fight over a pile of firewood. And to me, again, whether it's a right, that's a different question, because is it Nepal's obligation to somehow, in an impoverished country dealing with epic, they were bringing firewood into the cities there because after the earthquake, because they had no electricity. Who's obligated? Who is that right? Who's the obligation at the other end of the right? To me, it's a big chunk of it is us, and it may be that could come in different ways, but I think it's a big deal. It's a big deal. I don't know about you. It's an interesting time.
It is. We're in a giant transition. I mean, I often say we're in a revolution. We're in it. So it's really hard to sort of see what's happening. Yeah. But these shifts that I talked about in the newspaper, or just the shifts in the way we do everything in my own lifetime, or half of it anyway, it says things are happening very, very quickly. And our recognition of them, we talked about BioGraphic and these visual tools that we have to see it. I think it's a great leverage point for the human race. Did you see the Tree of Life article last week in the New York Times? Anybody see that one?
The new Tree of Life.
The new Tree of Life, yeah. The new
we are a sideshow, everybody.
We're a sideshow.
It's bacteria world.
That's right.
Do you have a bacteria exhibit here? We need a bacteria exhibit. Oh, good, good, good. This is Bacteria Planet.
So this is a little bit like, the move away from the Copernican world. I mean, we really need to understand our place in the scheme of all these living systems.
This is also, I just got back, because of that book I wrote in 1992 on the Anthropocene working group. This is
started that word.
I pretty much, yeah.
You pretty much coined it.
Yeah, I misspelled it a little bit, but at any rate, no, I wrote in 1992 that we're entering a geological age of our own making. And, a post-Holocene period. So anyway, I'm on this, I was at this meeting in Oslo last week where everyone else is a stratigrapher. Are there any stratigraphers in the room? They're geologists who study the story in rock. As one of them said there, it's the interface between time and rock. And they're the ones who are deciding if there is geological evidence that we've left the Holocene and we're in the Anthropocene. It was an amazing discussion. I haven't had time to write about it yet. But they're going through the same paradigm challenge that the Tree of Life is posing to the biological community, because all of these transitions in the Earth's history happened in the past, right? They're in rock, which formed millions of years ago. And we're at the dawn of an age where the sediments are just accumulating. There were presentations at this meeting on, there's a beach in the Basque part of Spain where plastic is being integrated.
Yeah, because if you see plastic in it,
it's actually, they showed photos of, it's actually rock. It's like very new sort of sedimentary formations that have plastic in them, and technofossils. This is a word I didn't know until last year. That's basically, there's a paper that just came out on the, there's enough concrete in the cement in the world that it could be a layer of sheathing the whole planet of I think in a couple inches or something like that. So we're laying down a new geological age, but right now. So if you're an old-style geologist, and they're mostly old-style, and you're presented with this question, there's a lot of reluctance. It's going to be, I told them at the meeting, I said, I didn't say it to everybody, but they kind of remind me, for those who've seen or read The Lord of the Rings, when the tree ents, remember the trees, or the hobbits are saying, well, we got to go to war, come on, trees. And these are these big tree guardians. They're basically trees. But the tree says, well, this is a very serious question. We need to ponder. And the geologists are kind of like that. So it's going to take a few years. And literally, they realize at this meeting, this is not like, people aren't waiting with bated breath for the answer. It's interesting.
Meanwhile, the plastic accumulates.
Yeah, and meanwhile, the paradigms are being challenged in all these different fields. It's like, it's what an amazing time. And this gets me to the education thing, which again, a place like this is so focused on education. And it's so wonderful to see scientists finding ways to interact with kids. Adam, I saw at the White House Science Fair I was there, was that just last week? Ish, I don't know. I finally got to go to one. It was first time in 6 of them that I was in Washington, and seeing President Obama spending more time than he was scripted to touring these exhibits and learning from these kids who are smarter than everybody in this room put together. It was inspiring. But Obama's, someone else is coming in. So I don't know if you have your own sense of what's important for us, meaning the people in the community, to do to make sure government is involved with sustaining or rebuilding our interest in breakthroughs.
I don't know. Obviously, the government investment in basic science research has fallen, like 40% since 2010. Foundations like our Schmidt Ocean Institute are trying to pick up some of that slack and take the lead on some of the technologies and some of the opportunities that come out of the technology and really to set the path. Somebody has to do it. It's a drop in the bucket compared to what the government can spend. But it's really important to do things like, I think, what Elon Musk is doing, to just keep moving forward and taking advantage of what we do know and do understand. My view of governments is they follow. They're not high-risk investors, to put it that way, right? So in many ways, the role of philanthropy is to be that leader. Take that risk.
Yeah.
Go and see what happens. And if you're right, the money will follow. If it's the right thing, if it's an advantage for a country or a government, it will follow. What I wanted to say about coming to the California Academy of Sciences is that I think that you give people a curated experience of the natural world. You take them by the hand and you show them what to look at, what's important. And whether they're one-time visitors or many-time visitors, I think everybody who comes to this wonderful facility walks outside and looks a little differently at everything else around them and thinks a little differently. This coral project that's so exciting that you guys are undertaking, we don't have corals in the San Francisco Bay Area, but we're so connected to everything. That's the question that I would ask about things that have to do with the ocean. People say, well, why should I care? I think the question should be posed the other way. In what world would you not care that half your oxygen comes from this place, right? That's under threat of so many ways from human activity, right? 2 billion people get their primary source of protein from the oceans, right? 3 billion have their livelihoods from the oceans. And yet we say, why are we connected? It's madness. And I think today, because we can see so many things transparently, we can communicate in so many channels, in so many visual ways, it's going to be easier to tell that story about connection. I think also the children growing up with connected devices, they take it for granted that we're connected. For us, it was something to learn. It's like, oh, wow, right. I don't just live in my city. Right? I think because they live that way, it will be easier to tell this story about the connectivity between all the living systems of the world. See? Right on cue. Perfect. Yeah.
It's so, yeah, and although this gets back, once again, to education, I developed an understanding of some huge gaps in how we teach. Our teaching norms are anachronism. They're all based on, well, who was that guy, Ken Robinson, who did that? There's a great video online about how antiquated our methods of teaching are. And one of the things we're not teaching is how to know what's real. And that's in an age of too much information, and where, the squid video, the 100-foot squid on Facebook, I would love to, and this is an open question for you and everyone in the room, and especially you, perhaps, Adam. Can we develop a culture where veracity is cool? I mean, to me, it's a really big question. Do you want to be the kid who posts the video of the 2,000-foot squid, or the kid who says, that's not correct, and here's why? I mean, I would like to be that kid, but then and this happens to me as a blogger, dealing with climate and sometimes with oversimplifications, you get tired of being the scold.
Wag,
and that's not cool. It's not cool to be the one actually who says that's not true, because everyone goes, So how do you get around that? Do you have any ideas? You can think about it and get back to me. I don't know, but it's a real problem.
Yeah.
There was a book I did a Ford.
Disinformation.
Someone created it's sort of a nonfiction equivalent of a graphic novel. It's called How to Fake a Moon Landing. It's a book about how you know what's true in science by taking the contrary position. It says this is why we know we went to the moon, even though a lot of kids today have relearned the myth that we didn't. So the book is How to Fake a Moon Landing, and so it's trying to develop that, and
that framework.
We need more of that,
Yeah.
And I don't know how.
Yeah,
I don't know how to do
yeah.
this. So anyway,
New technology, new challenges, right?
are we allowed to take a question or two from the room? Because I could go on forever. Yeah. Any questions or? Wow. Oh, way over there.
Keep going.
Stand up and shout.
Hello. You're talking about changing the behavior of corporations and companies, and when I think about climate change and the degradation of the environment, it almost reminds me of like the war on drugs in the 80s, where everybody went after the drug producers when the problem was the demand coming from Europe and the United States. And a lot of, to me, I'm not a super educated environmentalist, but it seems like a lot of the, again, degradation, whether it's shrimp or granite or diamonds or the precious metals that make iPhones, people in third world countries, they don't have a choice. That's all, the only game in town for them. So to me, it seems like the only way any of this is going to change is by changing the demand, changing consumer behavior. And I'm just wondering how you both are kind of wrapping your brains around that, and do you have any ideas or hope or thought for that?
That's a great question. And of course, people in developing countries are more the victims of this than anybody. And when you look at plastics, for example, and the demand for single-use water bottles, right, in this society, I mean, that to me is just a crime. The people who have the least ability to deal with this stuff are being saddled with most of it, and most of it is going into landfill and into the oceans, where it's breaking down under sunlight. It's creating a toxic sea, basically, of BPA and all kinds of terrible carcinogens that are finding their way into the food supply. So we have a real problem. It's not that long, right? If you look at when this all started, it's after World War II. These industries really got started. We got like 100 years of being in this weird place that has these consequences. So I look at it because I guess I come from Silicon Valley in my background in the last 35 years of innovation, and say, what can we do to replace those very bad things with better things, right? It's hard to put the entire burden on the consumer. Most consumers are not that well educated. Those who are, those who identify with environmental causes, will make different choices. But you have to make it easy, and you have to make it logical for people. I think that the plastic shopping bag thing is a good example, where I can remember just like 5 or 6 years ago, it was a weird thing for people to have to bring their own shopping bag. And then they started charging for bags, and certain towns and cities started outlawing the bags. It's become pretty normative that you bring a bag, or you feel guilty if you don't. So in our culture and our consumer society, I think we need alternatives, and we need better demonstrations of how to use, how do people used to drink water, for heaven's sake. I work a lot in the sailing world. supporting the Land Rover Ben Ainslie racing team for the America's Cup now as their sustainability partner. First thing you do is you get rid of those stupid water bottles and get a filling station. And you can do this at any regatta, right? You can start to think about how you use the resources for any goal that we're after. You know, we would go after it purely on a scientific ground, but only 16% of Americans follow science, whereas 81% follow sports. So great platform, great learning opportunity, and we need role models.
Yeah, we're a long way from when I grew up sailing in Rhode Island, our way of dealing with tin cans was we had a BB gun on the boat, and you'd throw it over and pop, sink it.
Sink it.
That was in the 60s, so time has changed. I guess a question here?
Yes. How can private philanthropy influence political behavior?
Well, we've seen examples of that, I think. Recently, they're not all encouraging.
Yeah, yes, yes.
I think philanthropy, just in general, whether it's the issues we just were talking about or politics, might think about doing more related to communication, like you've been doing with Climate Central.
Yeah.
This is I think it's an undervalued arena that for a long time wasn't a target of grant making.
I think a lot of traditional philanthropy doesn't look at that particular problem. We've looked at it on the food side, realizing that if you're in Congress and you're going to vote on the food bill, most of the information coming to you is coming from lobbyists. It's coming from firms that are used to giving you information about conventional food systems because that's what, you know, are the vested interest. If you start to fund people in think tanks to create different kinds of information about regenerative agriculture, for example, create the tools. I had a conversation with Michael Pollan about this when we started working on the Berkeley Food Institute together. And he said, I don't know how to write those papers. I write books about food and people and food systems, but I don't know how to do that. Maybe there are people who do know how to do that, so help fund them. You know, think about it as a philanthropist in a strategic way. What can I do to influence those people? They're people too, and they're only getting one flavor of information. You can create alternatives.
And I'm going to just circle back one more time to education, which I've seen. When I moved to Pace, one of the courses I started co-teaching 6 years ago was a documentary course. For 10 years, it had been taught where every spring break, the students go somewhere and make a film, which is great. But when I started co-teaching, every film we've made is about an environmental opportunity or issue. Fishermen in Baja dealing with how to kill fewer sea turtles in their nets. But the one I want to mention is our students in 2011, our first film we did was about a woman, an American woman who moved to Belize in the 80s. She had a vision of a way to grow shrimp commercially, but with very few environmental impacts. And we made a wonderful film about her story. And the same year, journalism students at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver went to Thailand, and they made a film about the dark side of the shrimp farming industry. So kids, you know, 20-year-old graduate students who are making meaningful content that ends up on the New York Times website, in my case, and their stuff got onto international journalistic websites. You can start making impacts with the storytelling from the very get-go. There's so many great models out there for getting classrooms to be engaging more with a systems thinking approach to these problems. And you're not going to be thinking about your food and the impacts unless you think of it as a system. Energy, actually in my interview I did with Bill Gates in January for the Times, it's on the website, I asked him, I gave him some advice. There's a school in the Bronx, the High School of Science, there's a High School of Energy and Technology where part of the curriculum is the students go to the boiler room of their school. And the custodian is the teacher for the day. And just that alone is an amazing cultural thing. But they learn about the school as a system. It's not just classrooms. And they don't have to spend money on buses. There's no permission slips. And they're watching, they go down there. And if anyone grew up in New York City, the schools there until like 20 years ago, they were burning coal in their furnaces. And you shoveled coal into the furnace to heat the school just 20 years ago. And so they get to see energy transitions. And they get excited, and that's something that's just there waiting for you to develop that norm. It's just a new way of doing the same thing. It meets all the standards, but someone has to be doing that thinking and maybe a little investing in templates for teaching that way. And again, so many of the things we've talked about today could have that same approach.
And even for adults, I mean, from a philanthropic perspective, did you see Chasing Ice anybody?
Right.
Or Racing Extinction,
Right.
Virunga? These are all funded by philanthropists. A lot of the money going to those big films that they're on Netflix now and reaching around the world came from the unlikely source of philanthropy.
Great. I think we are out of time, so, and you probably are hungry, so thank you.
Yeah, please.